and they cause anger and pain wherever they go. Now, a local father who has felt their wrath wants them stopped. Good evening. The Westboro Baptist Church of Topeka, Kansas has become infamous for its protests at the funerals of servicemen.
They've done it twice in New Mexico. Today, as the U.S. Supreme Court heard arguments about whether the First Amendment protects those protests, a Rio Rancho father was following closely. News 13's Jim Winchester talked with him.
Diane, a family from Maryland whose son was killed in Iraq, sued the church for demonstrating at his funeral and won. Now the High Court is deciding whether or not to uphold that verdict. Rio Rancho resident Robert Jordan knows all too well the distress of losing a son in combat.
I was vulnerable, fragile.
He says the days following the death of his son, Army Specialist Alexander Jordan, were extremely emotional. Alexander was ambushed, shot, and killed in Baghdad 4 years ago.
The Pope is on fire!
Westboro church members showed up at Jordan's funeral in Rio Rancho to protest the war. They believe soldiers are dying in Iraq and Afghanistan because God is punishing America's tolerance for gays. Their protest at Alexander's funeral led to the Alexander Jordan Memorial Funeral Protection Act in New Mexico. It requires protesters at funerals to stay 500 feet away from family members as well as cemetery entrances and exits.
Society has to establish some standards. Not everything is fair game. You just can't say open season because of the First Amendment.
The Supreme Court case heard today, Snyder versus Phelps, could essentially force the Westboro group to pay millions in damages for emotional distress over their protest at Marine Lance Corporal Matthew Snyder's funeral. But freedom of speech groups say such a ruling would suppress the First Amendment. Commenting on the court case today, the New Mexico American Civil Liberties Union told News 13, quote, while the ACLU adamantly disagrees with the message of the protesters, the First Amendment was designed to protect offensive and unpopular speech. Alexander Jordan's father disagrees.
A grieving family has a right to be free from assault and when you're in such a fragile condition, you cannot allow that.
Robert Jordan says that the community, police, and veterans groups, specifically a group called the Patriot Guard Riders, did a good job of keeping protesters out of his sight during his son's funeral 4 years ago. Diane, back to you.
Okay, Jim, the U.S. Supreme Court listened to arguments on the case for about an hour today. It could be months before the ruling is issued.
Three suspected child